I almost didn't go to London that spring. My flight got delayed twice, my suitcase came out last on the carousel, and, by the time I dragged myself to my hotel near Victoria Station, it was raining, the kind of cold, thin drizzle that doesn't seem serious enough to use an umbrella for but still manages to soak straight through your jacket collar. I was tired. I was annoyed. And, honestly, the last thing I wanted to do was stand in a crowd of strangers outside a royal palace. But my sister had made me promise. "You have to see the changing of the guard," she'd told me before I left. She'd done the trip the year before and came back glowing like she'd witnessed something sacred. It's not what you think. It's not just tourists and hats. There's something about it. You'll feel it. I remember I laughed at her when she said that. I told her I'd go. Secretly, I assumed I'd stand there for 10 minutes, feel nothing, take a bad photo, and leave for a coffee shop. That felt like the more honest version of how these things usually go. So that Tuesday morning, it must have been around 10:30, I walked the 20 minutes from my hotel to Buckingham Palace. The rain had cleared, which felt like a personal gift. The sky was that pale grey-white that London wears like a uniform in April, not exactly beautiful but not oppressive either. The kind of sky that doesn't distract you. The kind that makes you pay attention to what's in front of you instead. The crowd was already gathering along the palace railings when I arrived. You get all sorts there, families with children on shoulders, older couples with proper cameras with long lenses, groups of teenagers in matching hoodies from some school trip, people speaking Italian, Mandarin, Spanish, American English. All of us strangers, all of us there for the same reason without really knowing each other. I found a spot near the left side of the main gate. Not the best view, but close enough. The tall iron railings were cold when I leaned my hand against them. A little boy in a red coat, maybe 4 years old, was pressed against the bars next to me, staring through with enormous eyes, completely silent. His mother kept glancing down at him like she was worried he'd stopped breathing. He hadn't. He was just looking. That's when I first noticed the guard. He was standing in the sentry box to the left of the main gate. You've seen pictures, the bearskin hat, the red tunic, the white gloves, the rifle. It looks theatrical in photos. In person, it looks different. In person, it looks like the man is made of something heavier than the people around him. He wasn't performing stillness. He was still. There's a difference. A performer holds something back, keeps some energy in reserve so you can sense the effort underneath. This guard had none of that. He just stood there, and the world moved around him, and he didn't. I watched him for a few minutes before anything happened. People were doing the usual things, holding phones up, waving, making faces, calling out things in various languages. He didn't blink, didn't twitch, didn't acknowledge any of it. A woman in a yellow raincoat got so close to the sentry box that her elbow was practically inside it. He didn't move. A man with a selfie stick angled the camera directly in front of the guard's face, close enough that the reflection would have shown in the lens. He didn't move. There's something almost meditative about watching it, actually. The more the world crowds in, the more still he becomes. Like the noise makes him quieter. And then, Marcus arrived. I didn't know his name was Marcus then, obviously. I found that out later, from someone who did. At the time, he was just a guy in mid-20s, American accent, wearing one of those light gray athletic hoodies with a university logo on it, sunglasses pushed up on his forehead even though there was no sun. He had the easy, rolling confidence of someone who'd grown up being told he was funny. He came through the crowd with two friends, a girl filming on her phone and another guy who was already laughing, the way some people start laughing before the joke even begins, as though they're priming themselves. They pushed forward through the gathering crowd with the low-grade rudeness of people who don't realize they're being rude, and they took up a spot maybe 3 meters from the sentry box. I watched Marcus look at the guard. I've seen that look before. It's a particular kind of look that certain people get in front of street performers, or buskers, or anyone who is doing something that requires their full concentration while the public watches. It's the look of someone who has decided that the performance, the discipline, the professionalism, the whole effort of the thing is actually an invitation. Like the rules of the space exist specifically to be tested by them. He turned to his friends and said something I couldn't hear. The girl laughed and steadied her phone. I had a feeling, right then, standing there in the gray April morning, that the next few minutes were going to be something I'd remember. I just didn't know how right I was. Marcus started small, the way they always do. He walked up close to the sentry box, not inside the zone marked on the ground, but right to the edge of it. He stood there and waved. Then, he made a series of increasingly exaggerated faces, wide eyes, puffed cheeks, a slow exaggerated wink. His friend behind him was recording everything, stepping slightly to the side to make sure she caught both Marcus and the guard in frame. The guard didn't move. Not even the slight tension behind the eyes that you sometimes see, that micro-expression that tells you a human being is in there, registering something. Nothing. The face beneath the bearskin hat was a face carved from patience. "Come on, man," Marcus said, loudly now, addressing the guard directly. A few people nearby turned to look. "I just want one smile. One tiny smile. I'll literally donate to the Queen's, I don't know, horse fund or whatever." Laughter from his friend group. A few scattered chuckles from nearby tourists who didn't quite know whether to be amused or uncomfortable. The guard stood still. Marcus rubbed his hands together and turned back to his friends with the grin of someone who had just decided to escalate. And here is where I want to stop and say, I'm not someone who gets angry easily in public. I tend to stand back and observe, wait to see how things unfold. But something about what happened next made my stomach tighten. Because what Marcus pulled out of his hoodie pocket was a fake mustache. A thick, drooping, stick-on novelty mustache, the kind you get in a joke shop or a party store. Black, about 5 centimeters wide, clearly designed for Halloween costumes or bad magic tricks. He held it up for his friend's camera, turned to the crowd like a comedian acknowledging his audience, and then turned back to the guard. I heard someone behind me say, in a low voice, "Oh, don't." But Marcus was already moving toward the sentry box. He stopped just inside the permitted distance, careful enough not to technically cross a line. He stretched his arm out, holding the fake mustache toward the guard's face, close enough that it hovered maybe 6 inches from the man's upper lip. The camera was running. The crowd had gone quiet in that particular way crowds go quiet when something might be about to go wrong. "What do you think?" Marcus said to the camera, grinning. "A little upgrade for the royal look?" And then, he pressed the mustache, gently, but deliberately, against the guard's face. For one full second, nothing happened. The guard stood exactly as he had stood for the past half hour. Still as stone, rifle at his side, eyes forward, face expressionless. The mustache sat crookedly across his upper lip, half sticking to his skin, half drooping off. His friend was filming. Marcus was grinning. The crowd was watching in that held breath, collective silence. And then, something changed. It wasn't dramatic, at first. It wasn't a shout or a sudden movement. It was smaller than that, and somehow more powerful because of it. The guard's eyes, which had been fixed on some middle distance about 20 feet ahead, shifted. They moved. Slowly. Deliberately. Like the turning of something very heavy and very certain. They moved until they were looking directly at Marcus. Not at him the way you look at someone in conversation. Not even the way you look at someone you're angry with. The way you look at something that you have now decided to fully acknowledge. The way a building might look at you, if buildings had eyes. It was the look of something immovable becoming, for the first time, aware. The fake mustache fell off his face and landed on the ground. Marcus's grin flickered. Just for a moment. Just a small, involuntary retreat in the corners of his mouth. The guard's eyes stayed on him. And then, and I want to be very precise about this, because it is the part one keep thinking about, the guard spoke. Not loudly. Not angrily. He didn't shout, didn't bark. He spoke in a voice that was quiet and level and full, the way a river is full when it hasn't flooded, but you can tell it could. 3 words. 3 words, and somehow they filled the space between them like they'd been waiting there for years. Step back. Please. 3 words. That's all it was. And, I know how that sounds anticlimactic, maybe. You were probably expecting something more explosive. A confrontation. A shout. Maybe the guard raising his rifle or calling for backup or doing something that you could clip into a 10-second video and caption with a string of exclamation marks. That's what half the crowd seemed to be bracing for, honestly. I could feel it in the people beside me, the way they went rigid, the way breath was half held. But that's not what happened. What happened was those 3 words in that particular voice, and the effect they had on Marcus was something I couldn't have predicted. Because Marcus, this guy who'd strolled up with his novelty mustache and his filming friend and his university hoodie and his rolling confidence, Marcus went pale. Not dramatically pale. Not movie pale. Just the small, honest paleness of a person who has suddenly understood something they hadn't understood a moment ago. The color didn't drain, exactly. It just quietly left, the way heat leaves a room when you open a window. He took 1 step back. And then, another. His friend had lowered the phone slightly, not switched it off, but tilted it down just enough to suggest that she wasn't entirely sure she still wanted to be filming this. The guard's eyes held on Marcus for another 3 seconds, I counted, not deliberately, just the way you count when you're watching something closely, and then, they moved back to the middle distance. Slowly. Deliberately. Like a searchlight completing its sweep and returning to rest. He was still again. Completely still. As if those 3 words had cost him nothing, changed nothing, disturbed nothing in the deep order of whatever it was he inhabited during those hours of standing. But everything around him had changed. The crowd, which had been pressing forward in that gradual, unconscious way that crowds press when something interesting is happening, had pulled back. Not by much. 2 feet, maybe 3. But the quality of the space felt different. It felt like the space around a fire, not because there was heat or danger, but because some instinct in everyone present had recognized that something real was at the center of it. Marcus's other friend, the one who'd been laughing before things got started, was no longer laughing. He had his hands in his pockets and was looking at the ground slightly to his right, the universal posture of a person who wants to quietly disappear. I looked at Marcus. He was still standing there, facing the guard, with the expression of someone who has just said something they can't unsay and is now doing the internal calculation of what to do next. You could see it working in him, the options presenting themselves and being dismissed one by one. Laugh it off. Walk away. Apologize. Make a joke. All of them felt wrong, and he knew it, and the knowing made him smaller by about 3 inches. What he did, and I'll give him credit for this, because it surprised me, was reach down and pick up the fake mustache from the ground. He picked it up, held it for a moment, looked at it. And then, he put it in his pocket. No comment. No performance. No speech to his friends or his camera about what had just happened. He just picked it up and pocketed it like he was cleaning up after himself, and then, he stepped back to where his friends were standing, and the 3 of them gradually drifted backward through the crowd and were gone. I watched them go. The little boy in the red coat next to me had seen the whole thing. He turned to his mother and said something in what I think was French, a short sentence with a questioning inflection. She answered him quietly. I don't know what either of them said. But the boy turned back to the guard and kept looking at him with those enormous, serious eyes, and the expression on his face was the most honest one I saw all morning. It was the expression of someone who had just watched something they recognized as important without quite having the words for it yet. Now, here's the part one keep coming back to. After Marcus left and the small drama of the mustache had dissolved into the general hum of the crowd, something happened that I almost missed. And I would have missed it. I nearly turned away, nearly started scrolling my phone, nearly decided the interesting part was over. But I didn't. I stayed. And about 4 minutes after Marcus had gone, 4 minutes of ordinary crowd noise, phones being raised and lowered, children being lifted for better views, the distant sound of something official preparing to happen further down the path, a woman approached the sentry box. She was older. 70s, maybe. Small and a little hunched, wearing a proper navy blue overcoat and sensible shoes, carrying a folded tourist map in one hand and a small paper bag from one of the nearby cafes in the other. She had the appearance of someone who had been everywhere and taken her time doing it. White hair, cut short. Glasses on a chain around her neck. She walked up to the sentry box carefully and deliberately, with none of the jostle or performance of the earlier visitors. She stopped at a respectful distance, a good 2 feet further back than anyone else had stood all morning. She looked at the guard for a long moment. Then, she said, quietly but clearly enough that I could hear her from where I was standing, "You do this very well." "Thank you." That was it. Just that. And the guard, this man who had stood motionless for over an hour, who had given nothing away to cameras or waving children or novelty mustaches, did something small. He blinked. Not the involuntary kind. The slow, deliberate kind. The kind that in a certain light and a certain moment is as much as a nod. The kind that says "I heard you" without breaking anything. The woman smiled, turned, and walked away. I stood there for a moment feeling something I didn't entirely expect to feel. Something like being reminded of a thing you forgot you believed in. I don't know how to be more precise than that without making it sound bigger than it was. It wasn't a revelation. It was smaller than that. It was more like finding something you thought you'd lost in a jacket pocket, the brief, private surprise of it. I ended up staying for the changing of the guard. My sister was right, it's not nothing. The ceremony has a weight to it that photographs don't capture. The slow precision of it. The formality that's been practiced so many thousands of times it's become a kind of physical grammar. The way the sound of boots on stone cuts through the ambient noise of a city and makes you stand differently just from hearing it. But I want to tell you about something that happened during the ceremony that gave the earlier incident, Marcus and the mustache and those 3 words, a different kind of meaning. The guard who had been standing in the sentry box, the one who'd spoken to Marcus, was part of the ceremony. I saw him as the new guard came to take his position, and there was a brief, precise interaction between them. Formal, disciplined, exactly what it was supposed to be. And then, the first guard stepped away from the sentry box and joined the formation moving away from the gate. And, just before he rounded the corner and disappeared from view, he looked out at the crowd. Not at anyone specific. Just out the way you glance at a room before you leave it, the general unremarkable sweep of a person finishing one thing and beginning the next. But, as his gaze moved across the crowd, it passed, briefly, almost imperceptibly, over the spot where the woman in the navy coat had been standing. She wasn't there anymore, she'd left after her brief exchange. There was nothing to see there. Just space and strangers. But the guard paused, barely half a second, maybe less, at that empty space. And then, he continued and walked out of view. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was making meaning out of an accident. Maybe my brain, already looking for something to find, had assembled a narrative from coincidence and timing and the general human desire for things to connect. But I don't think so. I think he remembered her. In the way that small kindnesses stay with a person through a long, formal, public, relentless day. Not romantically, not dramatically, just the way that a single warm gesture in a crowd of thousands will always, somehow, be the thing you carry home. I had coffee after the ceremony at a small place around the corner, tight wooden tables, a chalkboard menu, the particular smell of London cafes that I can never quite describe but always recognize. I sat by the window and watched people walk past on the street outside and thought about what I'd seen. What I kept thinking about was this: Marcus came to the palace with a prop. A novelty mustache and a camera and the intention of making something happen. He wanted a reaction. He wanted a moment. And, in a strange, inverted way, he got one, just not the one he was expecting. He got 3 words in a quiet voice, and a pair of eyes that looked at him with the full, steady, unperformative weight of someone who had decided he was worth acknowledging. And something about the complete absence of anger or drama or spectacle in the response unmade him in a way that no shouting could have. I've thought about why that is. I think it's this: when someone responds to provocation with noise, with matching energy, with the same scale of emotion you brought, it validates you. It makes you equal. It says, you have the power to move me, and you moved me. But, when someone responds to your noise with quiet, with 3 measured words and a slow shift of the eyes, it does something else entirely. It says, I see exactly what you're doing, and I'm choosing not to become it. And that choice, that deliberate refusal to be rattled, that is a form of power that provocation simply cannot touch. Marcus felt that. I watched him feel it. And, I think, somewhere underneath the embarrassment and the residual bravado, he probably understood more about discipline and dignity in those 3 seconds than he had in a long time. Not because he was lectured. Not because he was shamed publicly, or corrected in front of his friends, or made an example of. But, because something conducted itself in front of him with such complete, genuine integrity that he could feel the difference between it and himself. That's the thing about watching someone be truly, unperformatively excellent at something. It asks a question of you, without asking it. And, sometimes the question is uncomfortable. I was finishing my coffee when the woman at the next table leaned over slightly. She was around my age, British accent, had been sitting there since before I arrived with a notebook open in front of her. She'd been writing in it in that focused, interior way that makes you not want to interrupt. But, she'd looked up while I was sitting there, and, apparently she had been at the palace too. I saw that man with the thing on his face, she said. The fake mustache. Me too, I said. What the guard did, she said, and then, she paused, looking for the word. It was better than anything else he could have done, wasn't it? I thought about that. Yeah, I said. It really was. She nodded and went back to her notebook. I don't know what she was writing. Maybe something completely unrelated. But, I like to think she was writing something about the morning too. About how quiet things can sometimes be the loudest ones. About how dignity, when it's real, doesn't need to announce itself. I called my sister that evening from the hotel room. She answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been waiting. She'd known I'd gone to the palace that morning, and she had the patience of someone who has already been right about something and is waiting to hear you confirm it. Okay, I said, before she could say anything. You were right. She laughed. Not triumphantly, just warmly, the way people laugh when they're actually glad to have been right rather than smug about it. Tell me, she said. So I told her. All of it, the gray sky, the small boy in the red coat, Marcus and the mustache, the 3 words, the woman in the navy coat, the almost imperceptible pause as the guard left. I told it the way you tell things to people you trust, without worrying about whether it sounds like enough of a story or too much of one, just laying it out in the order it happened. My sister was quiet for a moment when I finished. The 3 words thing, she said finally. That's the part. I know, I said. Because he didn't have to say anything at all, she said. He could have just stood there and waited for it to end, and technically he would have done his job exactly right. Nobody could have said he'd done anything wrong. But he chose to say something. And what he chose to say was exactly enough, I said. Exactly enough, she agreed. We stayed on the call for another 20 minutes, talking about other things, her work, my flight home, our parents, the usual accumulated materials of a sibling conversation. But, when we hung up, I lay on the hotel bed with the lamp on and the sounds of the street outside, and I kept thinking about what she'd said. He didn't have to say anything at all. That's true. In the strictest interpretation of his role, his job in that moment was to stand still and be unmoved. He had done that. The mustache had been placed, and it had fallen, and the crowd had watched, and if he had simply continued standing there with his eyes forward and his rifle at his side, the incident would have ended. Marcus would have walked away claiming some kind of hollow victory, a story to tell, a video to show, a moment of disruption in something formal and serious. But the guard didn't do nothing. He made a choice. And the choice was 3 words in a quiet voice and a pair of eyes that looked directly at a person and saw them fully, without flinching and without cruelty. Step back. Please. The please is what I keep thinking about. Not the step back, that's directive, functional, a command dressed in politeness but still a command. The please is the part that is genuinely courteous. It isn't sarcastic. It isn't the kind of weaponized politeness that actually means something else. It's the real thing, the kind of please that says I am asking this of you as one person to another, and I believe you are capable of doing the right thing. It is a form of respect, even in correction. Maybe especially in correction. And Marcus, who had come with props and a camera and the intention of performing a prank for social media, responded to that real please the way that almost all of us respond to being treated as someone capable of better. He stepped back. He picked up the mustache. He pocketed it. He left. That's not nothing. That's actually something. The next day I had free in London before my flight. I walked a lot, Hyde Park in the morning, the kind of slow, unhurried walk that a city reveals itself through. I stopped at the Serpentine and watched the geese for a while. I ate a sandwich on a bench and let the ordinary afternoon move around me. But, around 2 o'clock I found myself walking back toward the palace. Not to see anything in particular, the ceremony was finished, the crowds from the morning had scattered. I just wanted to see the place again, now that it was quieter. There was a different guard in the sentry box. I stood at the railings for a few minutes, watching him. Same uniform, same stillness, same quality of being entirely present and entirely elsewhere at the same time. A few tourists photographed him. A group of schoolchildren pointed and giggled and waved. He stood still. I thought about what it takes to do that. Not just the physical training, the hours of practice, the discipline of the body. But the mental architecture of it. The ability to occupy public space with complete self-possession, to let the world crash up against you and recede without leaving a mark, not because you're empty, but because you've decided what you hold and you hold it well. There's a word for it that people use too easily and not carefully enough: dignity. I think people tend to think of dignity as a passive quality, something like composure or reserve, something that means not making a scene. But, watching that guard, and thinking about what the one before him had done, I think dignity is actually active. It's a practice, not a trait. It's the continuous, effortful choice to behave in accordance with something you've decided matters, even when the world around you is doing its best to make that choice feel unnecessary or pointless or uncool. The guard from the day before, the one Marcus had pranked, had practiced dignity in a moment when dignity was genuinely hard. In a moment when mockery had literally touched his face. And he had done it not by going cold or shutting down or pretending the moment hadn't happened, but by responding to it with the precise, minimum, genuine thing, a clear boundary, asked for respectfully. I've been in enough difficult conversations in my own life, at work, in relationships, in the slow grinding negotiations of trying to live alongside other people, to know how hard that actually is. How often we overshoot it. How often we respond to being poked by shouting, or to being disrespected by matching the disrespect, or to being made small by trying to make ourselves large. How often the instinct is to meet fire with fire, and how rarely that ends with anything resembling warmth. Those 3 words stood in my mind like a small architectural model of something I'd been trying to build for years without knowing quite what I was building. I almost didn't include this next part, because it sounds unlikely. But it happened, and I told you at the beginning I'd tell you what actually happened. I was standing at the railings, thinking all of this, when a man came and stood next to me. He was wearing civilian clothes, dark trousers, a simple gray jacket, and he was looking at the sentry box the same way I was. Not photographing. Just looking. He had the bearing of someone who'd been in uniform for a long time and retained it in his body even without the clothes. The way former soldiers stand, if you know what I mean, a particular quality of stillness that's different from ordinary stillness. He stood there for probably 2 minutes without saying anything. I didn't say anything either. Sometimes you meet someone in a public space and the silence between you is simply the right thing. Then, he said, without looking at me, "You were here yesterday morning, weren't you?" It wasn't quite a question. More an observation he was making out loud. "Yeah," I said. He nodded. "My nephew." He said it simply, without elaboration, the way you say things you're quietly proud of. I looked at him. "He's been in the regiment for 4 years, the man said. He doesn't talk much about what it's like. Standing out there for hours. The things people do. He paused. He said someone put something on his face yesterday. A fake mustache, I said, and felt vaguely absurd saying it. The man smiled, a small, private smile, aimed mostly at the ground. He said it fell off. It did, I said. He was quiet for a moment. His commanding officer asked him about it. Standard procedure when anything physical happens. He gave his account. Another pause. He said the young man who did it stepped back and picked it up. I thought about that. That's true, I said. He did. The man nodded again. My nephew said that was the important part. Not the provocation. The response to being corrected. He finally looked at me directly. He said it's what he tries to do out there, if he has to speak. Not to shame anyone. Just to give them the chance to be better than they were 10 seconds ago. I didn't say anything to that. I'm not sure what I could have said that would have been good enough. The man put his hands in his pockets and looked back at the sentry box where the new guard stood, still and complete. He said the woman was nice too, he added quietly. The older woman who said thank you. She was, I said. He nodded a final time and walked away. I stood at the railings for a while after that, watching the new guard stand in the April light, the city moving around him in its usual indifferent way. The sound of traffic and wind and the distant chatter of tourists. The cold iron of the railing under my palm. Just to give them the chance to be better than they were 10 seconds ago. I've thought about that phrase a lot since coming home. I've thought about it in meetings. I've thought about it when someone cuts me off in a conversation and I feel the old reflex of wanting to cut back. I've thought about it when people I love do things that frustrate me and I can feel myself loading up the response that will win the argument and lose everything else. Just to give them the chance to be better than they were 10 seconds ago. It's such a generous way to think about conflict. It assumes the best of the person in front of you especially when they are not currently demonstrating their best. It frames correction not as defeat, not as punishment, not as a power display, but as an offering. Here's a chance. Here's a door. I'm opening it. You can walk through or you can walk away, but it's there. Marcus walked through it. Maybe not with grace, maybe not with the self-awareness he'd need to have learned something lasting. But he picked up the mustache. He pocketed it. He left. And that's something. That's a person encountering their better instinct, however, briefly, and choosing it. The guard gave him that. Not by being passive, not by looking the other way, but by meeting the moment with the precise, clean, minimal response it needed. Nothing more. Nothing less. That is a skill. A real, difficult, practiced skill. And I came home from a trip I'd almost skipped, from a moment I'd almost missed, carrying that skill as a lesson I hadn't expected to receive from a man whose name I didn't know, standing in front of a palace I'd barely cared about, on a gray Tuesday morning in April. My sister asked me, a few weeks later, whether I thought Marcus had actually learned anything. It's a fair question. The honest answer is I don't know. I don't know who Marcus is, I don't know if he posted the video, I don't know if he told the story of what happened in a way that centered his own embarrassment or smoothed it back into bravado by the time he reached the pub that evening. I don't know if the mustache ended up in a bin or on a shelf or forgotten in the pocket of the hoodie. I don't know any of that. What I know is what I saw. I saw a young man, confident, careless, performing for an audience, get stopped by 3 quiet words and a pair of eyes that looked at him without contempt and without performance. And I saw him, for a moment, go still. Not the guard's kind of still. Not the trained, disciplined, purposeful stillness of someone who has decided what they stand for and stands there. But the ordinary, human, unguarded stillness of someone who has just been seen. There is something in all of us that responds to being truly seen, not flattered, not managed, not catered to, but seen with something close to honesty. Maybe that moment passed for Marcus the second he was around the corner. Maybe he laughed about it with his friends over lunch. Maybe the whole thing became a funny story with the guard as the uptight villain and Marcus as the plucky hero who tested him. Maybe. But I'd like to think, I choose to think, because I think choosing what to believe about people matters, that some part of it stayed. Some small, stubborn residue of those 3 seconds in front of the sentry box. Some faint recollection, the next time he's in front of someone doing something that requires their full concentration and dignity, that what he does next says more about him than it does about them. Maybe that's optimistic. Maybe it's naive. But the guard seemed to believe it was possible. He opened the door. And sometimes that's all you can do. My flight home was smooth. I slept most of it. When I woke up somewhere over the Atlantic, the cabin was dark and most of the passengers were asleep, and the only light was the pale blue glow of the entertainment screens. I looked out the window at nothing, just black space and the wings blinking light, and thought about the palace and the gray April sky and the little boy in the red coat staring through the iron bars. I thought about the woman in the navy coat and her 7 words. I thought about the guard, standing in the space she'd left, in the moment before he turned and walked away. Some people show you what it looks like to hold yourself with care. Not to protect yourself from the world, but to meet it, all of it, the difficult and the strange and the disrespectful and the ordinary, with the same steady, considered, genuine self. They don't do it for applause. They don't do it for videos. They don't do it so someone on a plane can write about it later. They just do it because that's who they've decided to be. And when you get to watch that even once, even briefly, even from a distance behind cold iron railings on a grey London morning, it stays with you in the way that real things stay. Not fading. Not dimming. Just there. Solid and quiet, like a hand on your shoulder that isn't there anymore, but you can still feel.